Thank you so much. Truly is a pleasure and an honor to be here and address all of you. First of all, I want to say that, today I really want to share from my experiences and what I have learned. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm not a producer. My background is really in wildlife conservation, so I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers or pretend to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't be doing on their ranches. But just wanted to share a little bit from what I have learned, some of what I've seen, what I've experienced, and hopefully it will be helpful. I'm going to be talking about, yes, range riders primarily, but I also am going to talk about the human dynamic as well, because I think really understanding that part is probably the most effective non-lethal tool that we have, is the people part of it. So just a little background on Burking Circle. It was founded back in 2015, 14, kind of had a nebulous start there. There was a collaboration between Northern California ranchers and at the time California Wolf Center, the organization that I worked for at the time. It's now its own independent organization, working primarily in California, Colorado, where I live, and a little bit into Oregon. I think we're unique because we always talk about how we both believe in wolf conservation, but also believe very strongly in preserving the agricultural interest and working within those communities. And because of my journey, I feel very passionate about that as well. All right, so a little bit of background to kind of get you to the main point of all this, going back to the Yellowstone reintroduction. When I've talked to some of the folks that were involved in that, in both the planning and the actual reintroduction, and since then, one theme that they all shared with me that was similar was that they realized that even with all the best planning, that nobody could truly predict what was to come. The tremendous widespread celebration amongst, wolf advocates, the tremendous ability for this critter to disperse and travel such long distances so quickly and establish new territories, the incredible divisiveness that happened amongst whole communities and within communities, and the incredible hardship on those livestock producers that were hit by this new challenge that had come along, not to mention the hardship on the critter itself. So it kind of caught a lot of folks that thought they were really well prepared, not quite so prepared. And here we are over 20 years later, and this is, I like to use this picture because, oftentimes in our conservation world, I see, this over-glorifying of the wolf, right? It's this cute little puppy, causes no damage, it's going to solve all the ecological problems of the world. But then on the other side, we also see the over-villainizing of this critter, where it's this vicious killer and it's going to be the end to everything we know today. And neither of these things help. It has only really led to that increased polarization, the polarizing debate that has divided whole communities and has not helped wolves, livestock, and people to thrive. It has only continued to escalate the situation. And as a result, in many ways, this animal now carries this burden on its back. It's become a political instrument. It's become a tool for fundraising. Send me all your money or the wolf's going to die. It has become this symbol of wilderness for urban communities, and has also become a focus for a lot of rural challenges. But beyond, the wolf having this burden, sometimes it is forgotten within the conservation communities that even though wolves may not impact the livestock industry as a whole, for those individuals hit, it's a tough go, especially if it's repeated. And it's not just an economic loss, it's an emotional loss as well. And I remember that was one of the things for me that really impacted me is realizing that fact. It's easy for folks in urban communities like myself to get super excited when a critter shows up, but realizing that that's not, my livelihood is not going to be negatively impacted by the return of this top predator. So now today, we look back at the wolf reintroduction, and amongst the conservation community, it is hailed as one of the most successful conservation stories of our time. And it's deserving of that in many ways. If we consider the population numbers of the wolf, its ability to disperse, it's pretty amazing. The work that went into planning this out, it should be hailed as a huge success. When I started thinking about it, as I got more involved in this work, I thought, has it really been successful? When you think about it in comprehensive terms, when you think about the controversies, the conflict, the divisions of whole communities and groups of people, and when you think about the hardships on the livestock communities that have been hit, or even on the hardship on this animal itself, and began to think that maybe it hasn't been as successful as we have said that it is after all this time. Because, wolf recovery or wolf conservation isn't a linear process, nor the challenges that come with it, and ranching certainly isn't a linear process, nor the challenges that come with it. So maybe it is time to change the conversation. Maybe it's time to change the paradigm of how we define success that includes the people, the land, the livestock, and the wolf as equal values in this equation, by coming together to try to neutralize this polarizing debate instead of continuing to fuel it, to find a way forward that unites rather than divides the values and views of both rural and urban communities for a better way forward when it comes to sustainable agriculture and large carnivore conservation. So that is kind of how the Burking Circle came to be. It was actually the idea of the ranchers up in Northern California when they realized, this wolf person isn't so bad. Maybe there are people out there that can understand our ag story, where we're coming from. And so our focus has been to try to ensure that these shared wild and working landscapes can thrive in the modern world, because we do have to realize that we live in the modern world. The landscape isn't the same as it was 100 years ago or even 50 years ago for wolves nor for ranching. Things have changed, and that is the way it is. And with increased human population and more competition for open space, these large carnivores are dependent on these open, intact lands, private lands that ranchers provide and host the elk and the deer that these critters depend on. So because of this, co-occurrence with wolves and livestock is going to be certain in some areas. So that and in between wild and working is getting pretty fuzzy. So it's kind of more like looking at, ensuring that these wild working landscapes can thrive in the reality of today's world. But understanding really is the first step. And it's not about changing anybody's minds. I'm always going to love wolves, but it doesn't mean I can't love and appreciate what the agricultural community contributes and what they stand for. But it's understanding people's values, and it's about coming together. And I do feel very fortunate in my conservation world, because I do feel like I had a unique opportunity for those ranchers that were willing to take a risk, open up their homes, their hearts, and let me see kind of a different way, allow me to see things from the inside out, and kind of felt like this veil was lifted from what I was taught, in my wolf world. And it was really helpful for me to hear the real ag story, hear your story, and more people need to hear your story moving forward. And it really gave me that appreciation for, the culture that ranching is, the families, and the love of the land and the love of the animals, and the fact that ranchers are stewards, truly stewards of that open space. This producer, changed their whole grazing plan just so that these sage grouse could have their luck there every year. But a lot of folks don't hear that story, in the urban communities. That's not the story they're hearing. They're only hearing, the stories about the wolf and the wolves dying at the hands of ranchers. So how do we change that story a little bit? So the working foundation behind the Working Circle is basically this, merging ranchers' local knowledge and grazing experience, because nobody knows the land better than you do. You're out there every single day. I'm behind a desk most of the time. You're out there living it and doing it. And what we've discovered is that most folks have all the tools already to live with predators successfully. And then you combine that with some of these kind of progressive or cutting edge stockmanship practices and the science of large carnivore behavior, biology, understanding the wolf, not the mythical wolf, but how wolves hunt and behave. You bring these together, and we found that, producers can actually live quite successfully and be successful in their operations living with predators. And I've been able to see this firsthand. It's been very rewarding. But basically, how we start is what we call these baseline assessments. Obviously, it's not a one-shoe-fits-all scenario. Each operation is different. Economically, the landscape, the type of livestock they're running, their personal situations, and then co-creating a plan that is reflective of their needs. Bring in agency personnel when they're welcome and invited, because they're an important part of this picture. And obviously, I'm not the one going to be doing that, right? We bring in producers from other areas that actually live the life, live with wolves, and then, build those relationships from there. I'm certainly, as a wolf biologist, not going to tell any producer how to, maybe manage their cattle. And obviously, just tracking the landscape itself through cameras. These are just some silly pictures that we had. As part of that too. But the primary focus, and Nate talked about this a little bit, is the idea behind reducing the vulnerability in cattle and increasing ranch resilience. Because if you're going to raise a prey animal in predator country, you're going to want to make sure that your livestock, that prey, is the least vulnerable on the landscape. And part of that then is also to increase ranch sustainability or ranch resilience. And basically, that, just to quote one of our partners in Montana, Hillary Anderson, that just basically means the ability to hold multiple values by being able to withstand the challenges of time. And how do you do that? So part of that, and I won't go into the details here because Nate did talk about that, is understanding how wolves hunt and wolves on the landscape, and then trying to mimic this behavior within your cattle through stockmanship. And that's really where our focus is. A lot of times, I know I'll mention the word range riders to producers. They're like, that doesn't work, or it's kind of a term that's been kind of taken, and coined by the conservation community. But, not all range riding is the same. And even, the term low-stress livestock handling is often tossed around there lightly. But, there is the true art of it, which takes years to learn. And then there's kind of, not really the true art of it, I guess. And but what I've seen with some of these stockmanship practices is the focus really is on managing the cattle and not the wolves. You can't really manage wolves that well, but folks have control generally over their cattle. And just to share a really quick story, when we were in Montana, because what we'll do is sponsor producers to go spend some time up there in Tom Minor Basin, is, we'd been up there about a week and a half, and one of our assignments was then to bring the cattle up to this upper meadow, but it was really close to an active rendezvous site not too far away. And everybody thought, what in the world, is she having us do? Is this some, trying to show off? This doesn't make any sense. We've always told, don't go near where the wolves are. But she mentioned that they needed to get the cattle there. That's where they needed to graze. But, the cattle were prepared. They knew how to handle themselves living with wolves. So sure enough, we went back up there the next morning. And there was mamas standing, some were laying down, their babies they're mothered up, and two wolves went running or trotting right through, and everybody just ignored each other. The cows didn't panic. The wolves ignored them because those wolves knew those cattle weren't vulnerable and those babies weren't vulnerable, and the cattle knew that too. And there's been the direct scientific correlation between how cattle are handled prior to wolf presence that relates to how cattle handle themselves in wolf presence. Now, it's a lot more challenging with yearlings because they're kind of like teenagers and they want to do what they want to do no matter what, but it's especially effective with cow-calf pairs. But what's neat about this is it does take a lot of prior investment in time and practice, but there's a lot of economic benefits, wolf or no wolf, which I think has been particularly beneficial to a lot of the producers that we've worked with. And it does address the concerns of cattle stress due to wolf presence. You often hear that, right? Because wolves are always testing. If they're in the area, they're testing. And what does that do to cattle? It makes them behave like prey animals. They move around, they're nervous, cortisol levels go up, shrinkage, the whole bit. But because these cattle are more confident and they're starting to do more studies, they're showing that there's no difference in weight gain. So kind of going through these quickly because there's the time here. I want to respect everybody's time. The other part of the ranch resiliency part through prescribed grazing, and again, part of this ag story that I think more of the urban communities need to hear is, the benefits of some of these prescribed grazing plans to the landscape and increasing soil health, nutrients, being able producers to increase the AUMs, I've seen these dead landscapes come alive because of grazing, not the opposite of what you hear a lot, at least what I hear, I should say, in the urban communities. And the fact that, how grazing actually helps to improve a lot of the wildlife habitat for the elk and deer that wolves depend on eating. So I just thought that was an interesting correlation, how cattle grazing can actually help improve the land for the wolves. So there's a lot, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot more that we have in common than not. And this is all done through what we call our range stewardship program, which is a very comprehensive range riding program. The reason we have beyond human presence is a lot of times, when we talk about range riding, it's about vigilance, which is important. But, you guys can't be out there 24/7. Sometimes you can't even get out there, every day or every few days. And what's really great about some of these techniques is you don't have to be, because the cattle are trained, they can take care of themselves, and you don't have to be with them continuously like you hear about with a lot of the traditional current range riding programs. One of the big focuses behind this is really the emphasis on ranchers, working with ranchers. I always say that, if I'm out of a job in a few years, great, because it's not my place, really. This is about you. It's about ensuring the sustainability of your operations. It's about keeping ranching for the long term, for all the benefits that it has to offer to, our country, and about connecting people to people. And another quick story here is I've received a call from our wolf biologist in California with CDFW, and he said, we need help. We've got, the last impact has moved over here. We need to get some fladry up real quick. And but by the time we got there, they didn't need us. The neighbor who had already knew about the stuff was already helping his neighbor put it up, and they were talking about some of the things they had learned in Montana, these other things, and it just kind of grew from there. So the idea is not to create long-term reliance, but to allow folks the independence. Let them manage. This is your land. You manage your land and your cattle, and just provide the resources and support as you see fit, is what we try to do. And then I love this sign in Siskiyou County because it's true. Thank your local rancher for wide open spaces. And Suzanne talked about this kind of win-win scenario situation, and I do believe in that very much, because oftentimes when we talk about coming to the table and talking, it means that you have to compromise. Somebody has to give something up in order to be able to work on some of these issues. But what we have found is that in a lot of ways you don't have to, because sometimes compromising scares people, because it does mean you have to give something up. But through some of these techniques and these strategies, these long-term sustainable strategies, everybody is gaining something. The urban public gets to keep their wolves alive. Producers get to keep ranching in a sustainable way, in an economically viable way. The agencies responsible for conserving wolves have a lot less heartache in doing their jobs. So it is a great thing too for that urban public to see ranchers as stewards, truly being the stewards of the landscape that includes the wolf. And I've seen that producers, even though they're a little shy about it, who actually do embrace that, it's been a benefit to them. And this is kind of a fun example. This was some college students that put this banner together for one of the producers that we're working with that changed their operations. Made some adjustments, I should say, because they had wolf presence and they were concerned. And anyways, word got out. And not that this rancher, Jesse, wanted to be known for protecting wolves in her community at all. But the point is, this is a value that these Oakland inner city kids held, was about the wolves, and they were recognizing that. And then they're sharing it with other people in their community. Look at what these ranchers are doing, This is really cool. And it just created this synergy from there. And it really is, if our mindset is different, our activities will be different. Because sometimes, we will take actions in defense of, our stance or our cause that is actually counterproductive to that cause we claim to serve. Rather, it's the conservation community blaming ranchers for climate change or, all that kind of stuff that we hear. What does that do? It just makes you feel defensive and want to fight back. Or if the ranchers start talking about the SSS, or pushing lethal really hard, what does that do with the, the conservation group, makes them want to fight. And it just fuels that polarizing debate. So again, if we can change that conversation a little bit, it doesn't have to be that way. But it's really important to get there that we are able to move beyond the myths, because there's so many myths surrounding the wolves. And a lot of times we hear, well, gosh, this strategy won't work and that strategy won't work. You know, we can all stay stuck, or we can take risks on both sides. You know, because we can't make good management decisions based on myth, but the same thing is true in the urban public. You know, when I'm talking to folks, I try to be your voice the best that I can, because the urban public can't make good advocacy decisions based on myths surrounding ranchers either. So looking forward, we really do have a choice. We can stay stuck in that rhetoric, we can stay stuck in that it won't work, or it's going to be too hard, or we can make a different choice. And I love this because, you know, this is a different producer we worked with, and she went to Montana and went through some of this training, the stockmanship stuff, and she's from a multi-generational rancher. She knows what she's doing. And she's like, you know, that's not going to work in our country. That's all wide open. You know, it's going to be hard to defend this. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. But she came back. She started spending time out there. She started experimenting, talking to folks, playing with things. A lot of it was stuff I didn't understand, but it made sense to her. She started getting excited about it, and she started to learn. And she was finding success with it. And it was interesting because how I met her was through her parents. Her parents came to one of our workshops, and they were not happy that we were there. You know, why are you here in our community telling us what to do, talking about the wolf? We don't want to hear it. But then they realized that, you know what, the wolf's here to stay. Maybe, you know, our daughter's going to inherit our ranch. You know, we want her to be successful. So Jess got involved, and now she takes her son with her all the time. So by the time he grows up, you know, it's going to be kind of the norm from him. He will have inherited a new legacy. So basically, she's insured, you know, and her parents have ensured that, yes, those grandkids will inherit that ranch because they were willing to try some of these strategies and try a different way. And it was a pretty neat thing to see. Because, you know, again, I think the world is just getting too small for us to stay in our corners. So just in closing, I love this quote. You know, it's kind of foo-foo, but it's still a good one. You know, a lot of times we talk about collaboration and meeting in the middle and coming together and talking, and, you know, it's a lot easier said than done, right? Because there's a lot of emotions, a lot of passions. Sometimes our values don't always line up. But, you know, the thing is, first of all, we have to be willing to create that field first. That's the biggest challenge, where people feel safe to come together. And I think this is a great opportunity that Randy has put together for folks to come together. But even if you create that field for people to come and have the conversations, you can't always expect that people are going to come running into the middle and be all kumbaya, right? With too much, you know, we've all been ingrained too much to where we are. So sometimes it's important, again, to take that risk, walk across the field, and just reach out your hand. You might be surprised at the outcome. I mean, that's what happened to me. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. And I'm so grateful because 10 years ago, they asked me what I thought of, you know, I had a very different opinion, and I'm very grateful that a producer reached out their hand and allowed me to see. And I have seen firsthand that this can work. It absolutely can work, but it's our choice. And it's everybody's choice here, if they wanted to make it work or not. So, thank you.